So I suppose you can now all hear me? Okay, so we shall get started. For the next 45 minutes, more or less, the idea is just to share a little bit of inspiration. So it's not a content webinar, it's not kind of a recipe on how to provide learning design successfully, but we will try to share some of our key topics of what we have been discovering that is useful and that it works, and that it also provides us a lot of fun and some successes among a lot of failures. So our agenda for today, let's see if I can manage to change the slide. Okay, our agenda for today is understanding 4 key topics: define, design, deliver, and discover the art of learning experiences. And we will do so by setting ourselves in some kind of mood where you are supposed to think about what was a powerful experience, learning experience for you. What did you do, or what happened? What were the ingredients that made that experience really relevant and powerful for you as a learning experience? And one of the inspirations we always enjoy sharing is about Miles Davis. So when you talk about learning, and considering that we always talk about learning based on something very specific, that's the Triple H pedagogy, where you are supposed to use your heart, your head, and your hands to provide a meaningful learning experience, we always try to find inspiration from different sectors and different people that we manage to connect across our lives. And one of the persons that we find really inspiring is Miles Davis, and the way that he was providing his leadership style with these musicians and through the jam sessions that he organized. And this is a short text that we always find useful to share, as it talks about something that should be really relevant for the learning design, and the majority of the times as learning designers or learning facilitators we keep forgetting. And as you can see, it talks about, in the second sentence, it already starts talking about being on stage, but that doesn't mean that he is alone on stage. It means that he is on stage with a team of musicians, and he is guiding the focus or center of gravity, but they are collectively creating the show and the music and the inspiration that they want to provide to the people that are just taking part on their experience. And it's a leadership style that they present as minimalist, because you do not see the traditional role of the leader, but he is there. And for sure, if you attend any jam session, you will understand that there is a lot of leadership behind the stage, and there is a lot of leadership happening in the stage, but you just don't need to make it visible. You just don't need to make it really showing off, as it's kind of relation-based leadership. And this is something that we will be also talking about in the next 45 minutes, how you need to use connections and emotions to create your culture of learning, and to make sure that everyone that is on board your learning journey will be there and will attend and will be present and will take some relevance from the process. As changing agents, and as we are talking about learning design and learning design in the 21st century, and we are trying to do it within the scope of the Learning Shift project, and trying to understand what's the future of learning, there's also something that we all need to be aware of. Despite the fact that you may not be a change management now, there is no option in terms of future, because learning will change. Either if you take part on the process, or if you just decide to be an observer, you will be affected by the change in learning. So it's kind of the time for you to decide if you want to be in this 5% that are being pioneers for the learning process, for the learning change that is happening, or if you want just to join afterwards, if you want just to receive what's going to be the change process that we will be seeing in the learning environments. And as a change agent, if you decide to take the role of a change agent, the first thing you need to make sure is that you have a shared vision. There is no learning change, no learning innovation that will happen if you just stay within your classroom, within your school, by yourself, trying to implement something new. New is also a concept that we still need to revise during this webinar, as new may not be the same for all of us, and new today may not be the new tomorrow, so we always need to keep evolving. But having a shared vision is the first step for what you need to do. And having a shared vision allows you to have common ground, allows you to have an alignment, something that people will see why they need to put effort, passion, resources, time, emotions. And if they understand this shared vision, and if they feel it as their own vision also, and this is also has to do a lot with ownership, then you may start your learning design journey. And having a shared vision demands that you also have a common language, because people need to understand the concepts. People need to understand what they are saying to each other. And if I talk about learning innovation, it may not be the same if I talk with you or if I talk with someone in some different context. So it's really important that you also create this common language before you start designing any learning journey. And it's really important that you do it with a group of people, a team, that you can call your creative collective. So you need to find people, either if it is 1, 2, 10, 20, it depends on the context, it depends on the country, it depends on the level of education you are working with, but you need to find people that share the same vision as you do. And you need to support yourselves, because all learning journeys take efforts and take risks, and everyone that is trying out innovation will for sure face risks and face failure. So you need a creative collective to support your journey. You need a safe space, because you need to understand and you need to agree on the rules for having the opportunity to fail, to experiment, to try, not to be a performer as we have been as teachers for many years, not to be there as an expert, but to be there as someone that is creating something in a collaborative way, just as Miles Davis and his team were doing. And you need to make sure that you give space for the students and your colleagues to have higher ambitions, because you trust in their higher capacity. And when we say this, we know for a fact that sometimes it's not going to happen, and sometimes you are going to fail, and sometimes both you and your students will just aim for the stars and understand that you just didn't have the time, the opportunity, the moment, the resources that you need. But that's what makes learning meaningful, and that's what will allow you to create connections that will support the growth of your students. Then you also have to make sure that you have meaning and sense making. So all the learning design that we do, we always try to have in mind that it has to be meaningful, and you have to provide opportunities for the students to create their own sense of what they are learning and what they are applying in terms of learning. So everything you do has to be relevant. All the content, all the methods, all the theories that you use need to be relevant. And this means that you start using better content, better methods, better theories, and not more content, more methods, and more theories. And by starting with a vision, where do we usually start? And this is kind of a proposal that we always share with our teams and the schools and the organizations that we work with. There's something that is out there for many, many years that talks about the golden circle from Simon Sinek. And this is kind of an adaptation of the golden circle. So you need to focus on having the why, the what, the how, and the who clearly defined before you even start designing any learning experience. You do not move to content, you do not move to theory, you do not move to methods, you do not move to implementation before you have really, really clear what's your purpose and how are you going to create alignments with your group of learners. How are you going to share the purpose? How are you going to create a common ground? Then you need also to be really aware of what do you want to share through your learning journey. What are the skills, the knowledge, the attitudes, and the values? And this is much more relevant now that everyone across Europe and in all other countries of the world are talking about the 21st century skills. And you have research from top researchers from the European Commission, and everyone is setting what they call the 21st century skills. But the fact is, we have it in theory, but are we truly applying it in our learning processes? That's the big question that we also want to answer with the learning design proposal that we have. Then you have the how, and the how has to do always with how are you going to do it. It has to be realistic, it has to be doable, but it also has to aim for the stars and to make sure that you are being ambitious and you are talking to the capacity of the team that you have, the group of learners that you have. And the who is, who are you going to involve in your learning journey? Not only your colleagues, your staff, your students, but also the organizations in your community. Who can you connect to make sure that your learning design and your learning journey will be as meaningful as you can make it? And to do this, our learning design always starts by what generally people just do at the end. So we start by the goals. We start by setting, okay, what do I want my learners to achieve at the end? Who will they be at the end? What kind of students will I have at the end of my learning journey? What kind of profile of skills, knowledge, attitudes, and values, what kind of mindset am I trying to push with these students? And only when I have that really clear is that I come as a backcasting process and I start thinking about what are the implementation methods that I can use, what are the theories that can support, what is the content that is relevant for that specific set of skills, knowledge, attitudes, and values. And when I have the contents more or less clarified, then I can start thinking about how can I implement it, how can I execute the learning journey, how can I measure the learning journey. So it's always starting from the ends and keep coming back to the basics of the learning. Everything that we will be sharing is really about the basics and not something that is rocket science. We just try to remind ourselves of what's our role as learning designers and learning facilitators and what should we be focusing. And this is a visual representation of how we design our learning journeys. So we always make it very visual, as it also allows us to understand the connections between the contents, the topics, the specific moments that we have in our programs. And it also allows us especially to make sure that we focus not only on the content, the theory that we need to provide, but especially on the values, the mindsets, the attitudes, and the competences. Because as I told you before, it doesn't matter if you think it's really relevant. It doesn't matter if you recognize the relevance of it and you follow the research about the 21st century skills. If you don't make it alive through your curriculums, if you don't make it alive through your learning journeys, then you won't use it in practice and you will never assess it and you will never make sure that your learners are really trying to push their own profiles and really trying to get more in line with the values, mindsets, attitudes, and competences that you designed as critical for the learning journey. And as you can see, we always design as learning arches. So the principle, the basic principle is you if you set it, if it's worth setting, it's worth landing. So the question is, through our projects, through our process, through our learning proposals, we always design courses, workshops, programs that we focus on the content. We know for a fact what are the key theories that we need the students to know, but we never understand if we are really just pushing theory to the curriculum or if we are making sure that the students are understanding what we are sharing and they are using it and they are applying it. So the question with this learning design is that you have to make sure that if you start a new learning, either if it is a new theory, either if it is a new concept, you have to make sure that at some point you will make sure that you will land it. And land it may be just sharing what you know, it can be an assessment exercise, it can be just feed forwarding for what's coming next and see if they understood the basics to get to a more complex situation. And as you can see, we always start with something that comes before the course or the workshop or the learning journey has started. Because one of the things that is really important in learning design is that you make sure that you meet students where they are. And no student is a black or a white Canva. No one arrives with no background, with no experience, with no previous knowledge. So it's really, really important if you want to design a learning journey that will allow the students to take ownership and to be active learners in the process. It's really important that you meet them where they are and you try to understand what they bring to the class, what are their passions, what are their interests, and try to incorporate that in your learning design. The other thing that's on this design is when you start your first learning arch, if it is your educational proposal at the school, if it is your own course, when you start your first learning arch, you need to realize that you are setting a philosophy for the rest of your life. So the way you design your learning journey also shares a lot of who you are, how you see the world, and how you see the role of your students in your learning context. So it's really important that you have that in mind when you start the design. The other thing that we already talked about in the first workshop was the experience in the space. How do you organize the space to make sure that it's relevant and it fits the learning journey that you want to provide? And as we talked in the beginning, there are 4 main steps that we take when we design a learning experience. So it's the define, the design, the deliver, and the discover. And the define phase is where you choose the topics of inquiry, where you try to understand what's relevant, what's powerful, how you frame the capacity for learning and for the innovation that you want to take place. And the majority of the times we skip this phase because we already have our programs, we already have the topics that we want the students to follow, we already have our slides, our presentations, we know we are experts in our field of knowledge. So the idea is that you just need to keep on evolving. You need to make sure that you keep the pace of the world, because the world is changing and the world is always changing and there's always something new, and even your students can bring something new. So make sure that your learning design has enough space to keep evolving also, because learning is it's a never-ending project. You always need to make sure that you will come back and you will recap and you will just understand what's moving on the world. And to make sure that this is more visual also for the ones who prefer visual, this is kind of a way of explaining. When you have a tree that only goes up when it grows, that's kind of a linear process of learning. In our learning design, in the way we see learning happening, we do not see it as a linear process. We see it really as a very non-linear process. And this is what you can find if you look for rhizomatic learning or if you look for the theory U. And what they say is that learning is messy and learning is chaotic. And to make sure that you have a true learning process in place, you need to keep listening and sensing and making sure that you understand and that you see and that you feel the ones that are taking the learning journey with you. So the idea is that you have to pick the signs to create a process of sense making, because learning is just a creation of sense making for what's already there in the world or for the things that are coming up, and you also need to pick the signs for the future. And this is where you also need to make sure that you are meeting your students where they are, because if you find the connections between the things that your students are bringing to the class, the things that the community that you are involved with can bring to your class, then you need to make sure that these connections are in place and that you are getting the most out of these connections. Then there's another concept, that's the hidden curriculum. And generally, in terms of learning design, we always take care of the curriculum, the program, the things that are already defined in terms of subjects or disciplines, the things that we know for sure that we have to take care of and that provide credits for assessments at the end. But the hidden curriculum is something that it's always there. No matter what you do, the hidden curriculum will be there. And it's a huge potential, and you should be using it. But as we told you when we were seeing the learning arches, if you decide to use the hidden curriculum, then you need to make sure that it is alive in your program, and you need to make sure that you will land it, and you will assess it, and you will use the feedback to feed forward. And that's also connected with opportunity-based pedagogy. So when you think about a way of learning where you consider what's going on in the world and you try to do something that is meaningful and that has impact, you always need to make sure that your learning projects, the things that you are presenting as challenges to your students, are really needed. Because if they are not needed, if there's no need for what you are presenting, then don't bother doing it, because it's an effort for you, but it's an effort for the students that know that for a fact that there are millions of interesting stuff that they would love to learn, but they are always stuck with things that make no more sense in the world that we are living in. And if it's needed, you also need to make sure what's possible, because then what can you do realistically? You need to dream high, but you need to make sure that they will be able to achieve some learning outputs. And who cares? Who can support the learning process? Because you are just one teacher and you have one team and you are one organization, but there are millions of learning organizations out there. And if we connect with each other, the learning potential that we are opening to our schools is much more relevant. So these are the key theories that we use for the learning design. The last one has to do with the way we see the students and the role that we intend to have with our students, or that we intend our students to have in our learning experiences. And we see the students as active co-workers in this learning process. So it's not their role to be there listening to the expert. It's not their role to be there just attending the classes. It's our role to allow them and to create the conditions for them to work as a learning organization. And we need to make sure that in our learning design, we also give enough space and enough time for this team of students to create a sense of team, to create opportunities to learn together, to support each other, to discover the value of the other colleagues, and to make sure that everyone is adding up to the success of the team. And when you do that, there's a lot of skills that usually are very hard to try within the classes that you make sure you will take care, because students will take care of it among themselves and they don't need you to be an active agent on this process. Then in terms of design, when you already set the aims, the goals, the vision that you want to have, when you already set how you want to work and how you want your students to be involved, Then you have to tell a story, because learning is always about telling a story, and you have to make it interesting, otherwise it makes no sense. So I'm not sure if you all know about Hero's Journey. It's kind of a framework that all the companies in like Pixar use to create new movies. And they always talk about the hero's journey and the hero that starts a quest and he has a challenge to solve, and suddenly there's something really bad that happens in the story, and then he has to provide some kind of revelation or a huge solution, something really powerful. And then, even if the hero solves the question, there's always a part 2 and a part 3 and a part 4, because you can always put your hero into a different challenge and start all over again. And when we design the learning, we always try to do it as this learning hero's journey, because you need to make sure that the learners and your students will find topics and links and ways of staying engaged with you. But you have to make sure also that you do it with the right pace. So this is kind of the phase where you discover the magic of unpackaging the pursuit of knowledge. You are not supposed to give everything in the beginning, but you are supposed to give enough for them to get interested and to actively learn and look for what they need. And this is the design phase. So the big question in this stage is, how little is enough? How little do you need to provide to your students for them to be interested and for them to want to know more? And in our learning designs, we always try to start with practice, then reflection, and then theory. And the fact is, if you design it in a way that you get your learners interested and you get them to feel like they own also the learning design and the learning process that they are taking part in, the fact is they will ask for theory when they start having practice and reflection. Because if they do not understand what's happening in the practical, what you are providing to your learners is not about more, but it's about better theory and better methods. And then something that makes, can you hear me? Is it okay? Yeah, cool. So then there's always something that we keep forgetting, and there are a lot of learning journeys, learning organizations that already went for the innovation in learning, but they forgot to do the innovation in assessment. And if you decide to do learning as an authentic process, then you cannot have assessment as a fake process. And if you decide to have learning journeys that are designed to be meaningful and to create meaning for the ones that are taking part in the learning journey, then your assessment methods and your assessment tools also need to be designed in the way that you can understand and measure accomplishments that are worthwhile, significant, and meaningful. Otherwise, you will not be assessing the same thing that you are trying to support your students to learn. And this means that you are aiming for high order skills. This means that you will always have much more levels of uncertainty, because you will allow everyone to provide their opinion also in the processes. So this means that you also will support your students on how to assess themselves. You will also be open to be evaluated by your students, and they have to provide feedback also about your learning design. And it will especially provide a lot of information on how or what are your weaknesses and what are your strengths, but not in the same format that we do now, that we score the students and we rank them and we compare them and we create specific groups of the ones that are better, the ones that are not so good, but each one will be seen as an individual learner. So each one will be having a profile of what he can do, how can he improve, and what's the potential for growing. Basic process on all our learning designs is to make sure that you do it unfolding these 7 C's. And 7 C's are much more than what traditional learning environments were usually doing. Can you hear me still? Yeah, cool. And so if you look through our schools, to the majority of the schools that we have and the traditional school system that we have, everyone was always focusing on 1 C only. So content. Content was the key for everything. And if we manage to deliver content, and if we manage to have the students going to tests, standardized tests, providing the content that we taught them during the classes, everything was okay. In our learning design, we have to make sure that we have the 7 C's in place. So we start with a connection, and the connection means that you are dealing with people. You are dealing with students, you are dealing with teachers, you are dealing with principals, you are dealing with your staff, with your colleagues. And when you are dealing with people, you are always dealing with emotions. So make sure when you do your learning design that you have enough space to deal with the emotions. Either if they are positive or negative, it doesn't matter, you still need to manage the emotions that you have in place. And you need to find the connections between your team, and you need to find the connections with the community you are working with. Then you need to settle the conditions and the context. So what are you doing? How are you doing? How will the context affect the learning journey that you have? How can you provide enough conditions to your students? And only when you have these resources in place is that you start focusing on content and craft. And content and craft need to be provided in a meaningful way, because the idea is that the students need to apply what they are learning, and they need to achieve a mastery of the craft and content to be able to develop their character and their confidence. But character and confidence that for the students are showing up only in the 6 and 7 C's, for the teachers, in fact, are the basis of this model and are also across the entire model, because your character and your confidence will always be in place. You will always have your character and your confidence giving or influencing the way you are providing the learning journey. And through the learning journey, what we do is that we always keep it as an open cycle. So you try, you set, you define and design, you deliver, you try it out with your teams, and then you discover and you implement, and you see what's going well, what you need to improve, what you need to redo, what were your failures, how can you learn from your failures, and then you redefine and you redeliver the learning, and you keep on doing it, because learning is, as it is, it's an open process, a never-ending process. And everything you do is an intervention. When we talk about our learning experiences, we always make it very experiential. And this means that everyone is really involved and active, not only the students, but our colleagues and the staff, and we bring the community in. So the idea is that everyone is part of this learning journey, and everyone has ownership on this learning journey. But if you want to do this, you need to make sure that you give enough space for people to try things out, to be comfortable with taking risks, but also you give enough space for people to reflect at the end. Critical reflection is the only way, or the key way, to deliver meaningful learning. And to do this, sometimes you just need to step out. And when we say, as we said before, that everything you do is an intervention, it's because sometimes your intervention, the best intervention you can do, is just stepping out, really stepping out of the classroom, really letting your learners to be in charge of the process, really, if it has to be, seeing them fail, seeing them try it out, seeing them doing the same mistakes that you already saw other learners doing, but they need to go through the process if you want them to really have ownership on the learning journey that they are taking over. And then for the deliverer, and this is kind of the role of the facilitator and how you expect the teacher to be in the classroom. There are two roles that you can take. You can either be the one that is leading the space, or you can be the one that is leading particles. And you need to really look to yourself and to your profile and think about how you place yourself as a teacher in your classrooms and see what are you doing in your learning environments. Are you leading the particles? Are you trying to get to each student individually? Are you trying to control all the resources, all the things that you have in place in the classroom? Or are you setting the frames and are you providing the conditions for the class as a whole to take ownership and to actively also build the knowledge that you want to share with them? So it's kind of a new mindset that we are requesting for the teachers in this learning design. The idea is no longer that you have you as an expert showing up and doing all the work of the learning, because that's not learning, that's just you standing there and sharing what you know, and as if you own all the content and all the conditions for success. But the idea is that you show up and your main role is to really create the conditions. So getting back to Miles Davis, the idea is that you are there and you are just making sure that all the ones that are in your learning environment, everyone that is taking your learning journey, is being able to realize their full potential. So you are there to serve and you are not there to perform. And in terms of the art of facilitation, there are a lot of tools that the teachers can think about when they do the learning design, and they need to think how they want to set the learning goals for the students. They need to think on how they want to hold, how they will make sure that you have enough energy through the learning journey, how you will make sure that you have the flow going on, how you will make sure that you still have motivation, how you will anticipate the moments that will be of, I don't know, too much complex, too much difficult for the students. So you need to provide some space for dealing with all the emotions that you have in the classroom. And also you need to have tools, and you need to design these tools in advance to land the process of learning. And this landing needs to provide feedback, but also needs to provide hints for feed forward. And the main question here is that you need to be over-prepared and under-structured. So to be able to have a live organism, something that will evolve through the process, to be able to make sure that you are meeting your students where they are and you are providing enough ownership and you are building the design with them, you need to make sure that you are really well prepared and you think about all the ways you can set, hold, and land the learning process. But you also need to make sure that you are sufficiently under-structured to make sure that you will be able to adapt to what you get from your students. So it's being able to set the stage and the frames and to make sure that they understand the purpose of your learning journey, but also being flexible and try to incorporate what you receive from the signs that you pick up in your classrooms. And listen to the space, be able to listen to the space, it's really important. And there are a lot of levels of listening, and we really advise you to try to listen louder, try to understand the different levels of listening that you can have inside your classroom, and try to get as much feedback as you can, because this feedback is what will allow you to do this last phase of the design learning process. there is the discover phase. So this is the stage where you discover all the things that you can use to improve the learning journey that you have designed and to make sure that you keep on evolving. So it's really important that you find tools and ways, and you have to design it to be able to make sure that you will do it and that you will get the content and you will get the answers that you need. You need also to understand how can you make powerful questions. So what are the key questions that you need to have in place with your learning community to make sure that you keep on improving your learning journey? Teachers, as teachers, are also students, and as students, it's really important that they keep understanding their impacts in the learning journey that they design and that they are facilitating. And sometimes it's not about the students, it's not about the content, it's just about the way we are presenting ourselves. It's just about our learning or our facilitator role. So it's really important that we keep our eyes open and that we keep enough communication channels to make sure that we receive enough feedback to understand if our role is having a positive or negative impact in the learning process of others. And at this stage, I just want to offer you the opportunity to think, as a facilitator, what's your role in this process? How do you see yourself as a learning designer, as a learning facilitator, as a teacher that has a learning group? What do you see yourself in service of? What do you need to focus on? What do you need to grow? And what's the main challenge that you see for yourself? What do you need to do to make sure that you will be providing or designing new, different learning experiences for your students? So now, in the role of a student and trying to focus on yourself, what do you need to do to grow and to make sure that you will be the learning designer that the learning innovation process is looking for? Any questions that you may have that you think were not so clear during the webinar? About the 7Cs, Mathilde. Yes, we can, when we share the presentation slides, we can share with you all the key references that you can use to get more information about it. This is kind of a strange situation, as we were talking about emotions in the learning process, but I cannot see you, so I'm not sure what were the emotions that you were living during the webinar. So it's also a learning process for me. Kanika, you are asking if you can share some example of an ideal learning design experience. So, ideal learning design experience, to be honest, I'm not confident that that exists. I do have a lot of influences, and I have been luckily in a lot of learning experiences that were great and that were really powerful. But there's always something that you can improve. I think the ideal learning design experience, as long as you make sure that you are providing enough space for everyone to take part on the process, and as long as you make sure that everyone is having ownership and is actively involved and is getting an opportunity also to have fun and to celebrate, that will make for sure an ideal learning design experience. but it's always about how you design it, how much do you deliver, and how much you get from your students. So there's no recipe for success. It's always trying it out, and especially it's always having a lot of moments of feedback and touch points where you understand what's going on in your learning process. So doing exactly what we haven't done in this webinar, where I have no idea through the process if you are understanding or enjoying it, that's what you should do to have the ideal learning design. And about the why, yes, the Simon Sinek, we will also share the reference about the Golden Circle and how you can incorporate the Golden Circle as a tool for educational design. So we will share all the references with you. No. I was telling my colleagues, they were asking if I should share the presentation now, but I don't have the references in this presentation, so I will upload the references and tomorrow I think we may share it through the email contacts that we have from all of you. So we will send the presentation with all the theoretical references and also some websites and videos that you can see to get further in terms of content and some of the concepts that we talked about. Yes, of course, Mathilde, you can send the email. Okay, guys, so if there are no further questions, I truly thank you for being here and listening for the past almost 1 hour. And